はい。フィニッシュライン4か、なるほど。はい、はい、というわけで、というところで、選びましたね。はい、決着でございます。ありがとうございました。はい、はい、ございました。決着です。はい、はい、ございました。決着です。はい。
It just doesn't feel that strong.
So, as we said, as you saw, Riviere to me, doesn't feel as overwhelming and super powerful as the original fish meta was. I've been mentioning this in a few videos, and that's why I wanted to dedicate a whole video to it, simply because I don't get the same feeling. And I've been watching these tournaments, the Koshien that concluded like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then we had the VMC Osaka that concluded last week. And it's just looking at each result, like, yes, Riviere does still do well, and yes, it still does win and still does top, and the general consensus in the Japanese community is that, Riviere should be restricted on the next restriction list. But to me, it's kind of interesting because even though Riviere is tearing everything up right now, it doesn't feel as oppressive as the original, standard man meta. Simply because the reason why I'm making this whole video is because when Bermuda originally when Melody was super OP in standard back in the last summer, this was really a big thing for the game, in the sense that it caused a huge demographic change. There was 2 big things, I would say, that kind of coincided the standard man meta and standard, which is that first thing was that a lot of people went on hiatus from the game in Japan. I think in the West, we were kind of in this shop challenge season, and by the time BCS roll around, it was already restricted, so it didn't really affect us as much. But for Japan, I know a lot of my friends that don't necessarily live in Tokyo, but more in the inaka, not really middle of nowhere, but more in the countryside, where, the card shops are smaller, the communities are more tighter knit. They said that people just stopped playing standard for a while, and they either played premium or played other card games as a whole, and that was a really big effect that Bermuda Melody had on the game. And so I think that was a big part of what made the whole standard man thing feel so oppressive, and it was also the fact that not many decks had a fighting chance against it. At the time of Bermuda release, the only deck that could really keep up with it was Narukami, and even then, it depended on quite a few variables. And then, we had the following sets kind of power creep and creep Bermuda out, and then now it's kind of back, but Riviere, yes, it felt very strong on the release week, but for example, right now, if I pull up the most recent meta wheel from BVD Core, he basically does a wheel which, the outer circle shows representation, and then the inner circle shows top 4, and then the most inner circle shows all the winners. So this is between a bunch of formats in one meta. So this is for VEB12, and this is basically the Vanity meta, the one with Narukami, Shadows, and Aquaforce. And you can see already, yes, Bermuda is by far the most represented. 151 people participating in all these tournaments is it doesn't even compare to how many Narukamis or Aquaforces there are, or what's the other one, Shadows. So yes, it completely dominates them. Even those 3 combined don't reach, barely don't reach the numbers that Bermuda pulls in. Actually, no, it's exactly the same. Wow, that's kind of funny. But the thing is that when you look at the conversion, there's a much nicer conversion for Aquaforce or for Narukami. The size of the wheel more or less stays the same. And yes, while, they don't convert as super strong into the winners, the amount of winners for Riviere keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller with every release. We've only had this one release so far, but, even in the Bermuda set release, with each week, I feel like there was less and less of it. The first week was just overall super domination, and you couldn't really do too much about it. That was just the state of things. And then while watching the tournaments, at first my impression of Riviere was just, oh, this deck is crazy strong. This is unbeatable, this is gonna be destroying the meta, it's Standard Man 2.0, all these things. But then when I was in Japan for Worlds, I was hanging out with some of my Japanese friends and watching them play Riviere, or play Riviere Mirrors, or one of my friends playing Riviere, the other one doesn't. And just watching it, I was is this really that strong? Is this really Standard Man 2.0? Because it just didn't feel as oppressive. Yes, if they high roll, I don't even want to say high roll, if they draw their pieces and your opponent doesn't check defensives, you're kind of dead. A lot of decks right now in Standard, maybe not even a lot anymore, it's Claret, Revon, Anger Blader, kind of those ones, you know, they do feel that way. They do give off that kind of impression. But the thing is that, you know, I was watching these games and I was like, oh, he literally had a Riviere drop in his damage. That's one less attack he can do, and therefore it slowly becomes a dead card. You know, that's why you see people switching to these different variants of Riviere, because if you don't get them fast enough, you're kind of dead. Because, like, yes, the deck is really strong. It has, like, the supporting grade 3 that's really good for setting up solo and just bringing back your Rivieres. And, like, you have a lot of ways to recycle them, search them, all these things. But I feel like it's just, I don't know, it doesn't, how do I convey the fact that it doesn't feel as oppressive as Standard Man does? Do you guys feel this? It's just like, I don't know, I really had the impression before watching the gameplay that it was oppressive, but now after seeing it in tournaments and seeing how it just kind of like bends over and flops if things don't go well, it doesn't feel like Standard Man was the same. Yes, they could brick and like ride Athena or something, or, you know, things like that, but it just felt like there was such a lower possibility of that happening. You know, it just felt like there were so many ways for Melody in its prime to like just have a really easy game. It's just that, I don't know, maybe the standard has changed a bit to the point that the decks are so strong that there's not enough breathing room for Riviere to actually be as oppressive because it didn't power creep as hard. Like, people will argue, and I will agree to some extent, that Riviere did, you know, power creep the standard meta to some extent. But then when I look at Vanquisher and Revon, etc., that kind of match it, they don't feel as power crept. You know, they feel like it's the same power level that we already had prior to Riviere, maybe a little bit more, but not necessarily too crept. So I'm gonna go over some things, you know, from watching all these tournaments, what I felt about Riviere. You're completely free to disagree, you're completely free to argue back about these things. Like, these are my own kind of what I notice, what I've been watching, and I think, yes, you know, we have the restriction list next week, and yes, I think there is a chance that Riviere will be hit. I think specifically what might be hit is Caro, and you know, we had, I already mentioned this in a previous video, there was a Korean VGCS that banned Caro as a special rule, and then Riviere didn't do much. Like, that goes to show what the effect of that restriction would be, and I think looking at that tournament for Bushiroad would be a good sign. If they really want to restrict Riviere and they want to restrict Caro, that's what they could potentially do. I think what they could also maybe do is restrict the backup grade 3 that older Riviere players use, but then they would just use like Coral or stuff like that. Like, they're already adapting, so, you know, that's like kind of not worth mentioning anymore. I already, you know, mentioned the thing that, you know, if Rivieres go to damage, I mean, this doesn't feel like an argument. I want to say, like, I can already see people that in the comments would be like, well, that's not, like, anybody can damage their main grade 3. Like, if Anger Blader damages all of their Anger Bladers and doesn't draw into the last one, like, that's too bad. If Revon doesn't draw into their Revon, it's too bad. You know, all these things, it applies to every deck, and every deck needs to get that one good grade 3 to go, you know, just steamroll. And that, like, Riviere does have ways to get that a bit safer, and so therefore it's a bit of a weird argument. But the thing is that we've seen decks now pop up that are able to survive Riviere. You know, we've had Dark Regulars, DP randomly showing up, it's simply because Liner gives you that extra defense, and like Vanquisher has a pretty alright fighting chance against it. And so all these decks are able to actually survive this onslaught that Riviere has. And when I look at a Riviere player's hand and field and everything after they do their big combo turn, there isn't much left. Their hand is small because they have to keep discarding so much, and they lose drives and all those things, and they commit everything into that one combo. If anything, it's weird because Touch Kaze, after they steamroll you and you survive their combo, it still feels unwinnable. It still feels like you have so much to do to actually survive. But with Riviere, it's like, you survive their combo, okay, clap back, and that's it, the game's over. And when I was watching, you know, the Koshien and the VMC, that's really the impression I got, is that once you survive Riviere's big rush, that's it, you just clap back and win. Like, that's just how the game felt, and that's why I feel like Riviere isn't as insane as it is. In terms of representation, yes, it definitely is crazy in terms of representation, but is there necessarily a problem with it being represented so much? With 19 out of 151 players making top 4, is that really such a problem? I don't know, maybe. But the fact that there's 13 Arakamis out of 64, that's a much bigger conversion, and therefore, I don't know, man. It just doesn't feel like as much of a problem when, yes, there's more Rivieres playing, you'll have to learn how to play against Riviere, but if you can beat, like, what is it, 132 players, and then, you know, only 19 of them proceed, then I don't know if that's so much of a problem, you know, as much as it is just overrepresentation. And do you really want to restrict something just because it's overrepresented? I don't know. The other thing is the grade 1 and grade 2 Rivieres. I've talked about this again a fair bit in previous videos. They feel like pretty central pieces to Riviere being able to steamroll pretty well, because just like in Melody, having a good starting, like, opening turn with Lieselot and doing a bit of early push in turns 1 and 2, that really dictated how fast you can end games on turn 3 or 4. And so the fact that, like, Riviere, yes, it has a really strong early game if it opens those grade 1s and especially 2s Riviere, but if they don't have a strong early game as much, then their grade 3 rush doesn't feel as oppressive either, because then they're just, like, you know, slamming, you know, maybe their grade 2s restand, you know, on their actual grade 3 rush turn, so they get even more attacks. But if you survive that, and especially if they don't push early, and then, you know, it's easier to survive that rush, then it doesn't feel as threatening either. So I'm kind of just dissecting things in order of, like, how this deck can kind of perform. The other thing is that, like, we talked about the Karo restriction, and I think if Karo does get restricted, this deck really slips into, like, low tier 1, high tier 2, where it's like the same power level, maybe a bit lower than the current other decks that I mentioned are, like, the best, but it doesn't feel as oppressive. And it's interesting to me because on the Japanese side, people really do agree that Riviere should be getting a restriction, even though it just came out, like, in December in Japan, so it's only been 2 months. And from Bushiroad's perspective, I don't know if they would want to do that, but for the sake of the game's health, maybe, you know, because a lot of tournaments are teams these days, and for the next, like, half a year or something, maybe there's not so much a problem with people bringing a Riviere to every team. But if they deem that to be a problem, then they'll definitely restrict it. So I'm not sure about restriction list. I'm not sure how they're going to treat this. I'm not sure what they're going to do about it. I think it's going to be interesting to see where Bushiroad decides to move with Riviere, because it feels like it's not so much a problem deck, but more of just, like, the community's outrage might lead to them making a restriction. And that's why I kind of want to present this counter argument to this entire reaction, because I had the exact same reaction, but it's just I've been thinking about the deck a lot, and it's just like, I don't know, is it really that crazy? You know, is it really the same? Is it really, like, above all these other decks instead of being on a similar power level? You know, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say for me, and so I hope this video doesn't cause too much outrage, but, you know, that's just kind of my opinion. And a lot of people do compare this deck to Anger Blader, and myself included, simply because it's like, the argument is also that decks like Anger Blader and Riviere shouldn't exist, but, like, not in the sense that they shouldn't exist, but they shouldn't be this good, you know, because Anger Blader is very much draw your grade 3, get your the grade 2 that can't be removed, and then you basically start to slowly steamroll and just, like, set up your win con really easily and just win games really fast. But then if you brick, you don't. If you go second, you don't. So that's just an important thing. And I think another thing that, one reason that might not lead to the restriction is that Japan gets orders in just a month with Quick Shield coming. And my kind of thought process that maybe with Quick Shield, this deck won't be as crazy. This is just a speculation. I haven't tested that idea at all. I don't know if anybody has, but maybe it helps you to survive a little bit, you know, just having that extra little shield to survive going second, because I'm sure that Riviere, you know, even going first with Quick Shields in play, will probably still steamroll. That's kind of my feeling, but we'll see. You know, again, it depends on all these variables that I've talked about. So this was just something to pick your brain about, something that I want to see some discourse about, because it's pretty interesting, and I think especially the chart that I presented regarding, you know, the participation, top 4 and winners, really paints the picture of, you know, the situation with Riviere. A lot of people are playing it, a lot of people deem it to be the best, but are they all topping? Not really. It's, you know, it's a very low conversion in that sense, and, you know, the conversion of Narukami instead is looking way, way, way stronger, and it's just, I don't know, to me that feels pretty important in that sense as well, and so it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this little discussion on Riviere. Also, don't forget, if you want to become a channel member, you can hit the join button down below next to the subscribe button. I'm always appreciative of your memberships, but if you don't want to, that's perfectly a-okay. So that's gonna be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.